The Florida Panthers could spend almost 3 weeks at home. So it's a great opportunity to bring their habits from the road to their own barn. We are going to discuss that and more here on today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, April 8th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So, Florida Panther fans, not only an exciting end of the week for the Cats based on, even though they did take the L on Saturday against the Boston Bruins, got to feel really great about how they tilted the ice in the final 20 minutes, and definitely how they dominated the play when they went up against the Ottawa Senators. But also a great weekend of hockey. The Pittsburgh Penguins are in the race. The New York Islanders currently hold the third spot in the Metro. Washington just got a loser point against Ottawa and lost in a way that you don't want to lose, with a shot from the blue line in overtime. But man, just a really tightly contested race all over the Eastern Conference. Still, nothing is set in stone. But for the Florida Panthers, one step closer to possibly a Leafs-Panthers series that could start on April 20th. But we do have a guest on today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to discuss more about the weekend that was for the Panthers and everything coming up as the Panthers prepare for 4 games at home from Amerant Bank Arena. He is my friend from the Hockey News, and he is also from the hockey show of the Lebatard and Friends Network, David Dwork. David, welcome back to the show. And also, it felt great to also plug your other show now in the hockey show with you and Roy Bellamy. So welcome back, my friend.
Thanks, Armando. Good to be back. Good to see you. I appreciate the kind words.
Absolutely, man. So for the Panthers, really, I mean, really the story of this road trip for the Cats has been really the amount of penalties taken, and really it really started to go up more even prior to them hitting the road. Thankfully for the Panthers, 19 of 21 on the penalty kill throughout this trip. And Paul Maurice even spoke about really they're going to go to the box a lot. It's just something that he's basically accepted. But it also tells me really that they're not going to go away from the style of play that has made them successful. And with the Panthers now winning 26 games, now their road schedule is out of the way. And really how they tilted the ice also in Boston, got to be fairly impressed. What were your biggest takeaways as far as the weekend and even the road trip that was for the Panthers?
Well, I think at the end of the day, or at the end of the road trip, you've got to be pleased if you're the Panthers with the way that you're coming home after the 6-0 win in Ottawa, where they finally felt like they put together a full 60 minutes where they looked like themselves again. And then the game in Boston where it was kind of a toe-to-toe match for a bit at the beginning. And then they got to the third period where Florida, as you said, really was able to impose their will, outshot Boston, I think, by 8. And it's just a nice positive message to go home. And you touched on what Paul Maurice has said. But basically, the main issue coming back from this road trip that they had when they started it was their inability to stay out of the penalty box. And, to his credit, Paul Maurice, just like, we've discussed it, we've addressed it, we are trying to stay out. It's not going to happen. And, in his own kind of backhanded way, taking a little jab at the officiating without actually calling it out. And good for him for finding a way to do it because, he is Paul Maurice, and that's kind of something he's known for is, wearing his heart in his sleeve and being very honest. But overall, Armando, I think you have to be happy with the way you're coming back from this road trip. 3 points in 4 games, Two excellent games overall, especially when you look at the way they'd played in the past. And now, as you said, they get to come home. They get a couple weeks at home. Monday's going to be their first practice in over 2 weeks where they get a full regular practice on their own sheet. And you got to think that hopefully, if you're a Panthers fan, that this is them turning a corner once again and hitting that stride as they get to the playoffs.
Yeah, and 10 games in 17 days, 4 games in 6 nights. That it's and you're not always gonna try to force a practice then and there. I mean, when it comes to this part of the season, already knowing what's part of the system, it's just a matter of just getting in the game action. You're not always going to replicate that in a practice setting. So thankfully, with these few weeks off, and sometimes some of them with multiple gaps now, with 2 days, like currently going on, with 2 days in between, and then even the Saturday in between the Buffalo and the game and the final game of the regular season, that's also a good opportunity. And when the majority of the NHL finishes on that Thursday, the Panthers will finish 2 days ahead. So that's another scheduling advantage for the Panthers that they have with them. And also, a few guys are starting to get hot too. Barkov, 7-point game point streak, five goals and 5 assists. Vladimir Tarasenko, and an opportunity for Tarasenko really to start meshing with Barkov in the case that when Carter Hagee returns to the lineup, he doesn't need to be part of that top line. He could start off on that second line with Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett too, and even possibility of putting Reinhart back on that third line with Anton Lundell, a line that got it going in the postseason. So I believe even with them waiting for Hagee and even Ekblad to come back, I mean, I think this could be a good thing for the Panthers.
Yeah, 100%. It's a good thing, especially when you take into account the way that they've played over the last few weeks and the discombobulation, for lack of a better term, that the team has had between the synergy between the way they're defending with their forwards and their defensemen, trying to get all on the same page. And, as you said, there have been some issues with the lineup, whether it's been the injuries. The guy that was like Sasha Barkov, Gus Forsling was out of the lineup because he was sick. Dmitry Kulikov was hurt, or was suspended rather. So you've had guys that have been in and out of the lineup. You've had the new guys come in with Tarasenko coming in, with Okposo coming in. So there's been a bit of fluidity in that regard. So now you get to come home. You're home for a few weeks. You get practices. You get time to congeal once again, get in the same page, and rest and heal up, really. Because as you said, you've got Ekblad and Verhaeghe both out, most likely for both of them until the playoffs start. But then once the playoffs get here, as long as they can get through the next 4 games without any major injuries, you can hit the ground running. So 100%, Armando, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and also when it comes to the Panthers and just how they've gone through these last few years about pace of play too, when it comes to not necessarily coasting in between the first 2 periods and all, but really the ability to save their best for last. I mean, really, we've seen it a lot. I mean, we've seen it in the Dallas game that resulted in 3 goals, and even in the games that they've lost, they said even though they have come out on the losing end, they have liked how they performed as far as getting the final 20 and saving most of their energy. And I think that's really fitting for the postseason. I mean, we saw, like we mentioned earlier, the game in Boston where it happened, where unfortunately the Panthers did get a turnover in their offensive blue line that led to a breakaway by Jesper Boquist in the end. But still, you gotta consider, when you think about the overall body of work when it comes to this Panthers team and how they play their best in the third period. I mean, it definitely gives me a good feeling when it comes to what is coming up, as far as and even in the losses, that they haven't always freaked out too, because they have seen what's ahead.
Well, this is a team, as you know, Armando, that's been built for playoff hockey, that's built for the intense moments, to perform and to excel at those times. And that's why you've seen them during the regular season come up with those big moments, whether it's been not so much lately, but they've had a lot of comebacks over there, the last few years. But now they play a different style of game where the comebacks aren't really needed, because they start strong, they sit on leads, and they really just kind of pound you in the dust when they're doing what they want to do. And it just all comes back to them being built for postseason success, to succeed during the playoffs, because that's when the game tightens up. That's when the penalty calls are hopefully going to be a little bit less, in terms of what Paul Maurice has been saying. And really, it's where the effort, you have to have it at 100% max effort from opening puck drop until whenever the game ends, whether that's at minute 60 or whether that's 4 overtimes in. And as we saw last year in Carolina, where you're just basically playing on fumes. But that's the way this team is built for, Armando. And right now it's just, we keep going back to it, but it's just a matter of getting back to the playoffs, making sure they're as close to full strength as possible for that run that they're going to go on.
Yeah, and with about 75% of their games going into the third period either tied or with a lead, this team consistently sets itself up to have those takeover moments when it comes to the third period, and when you have that repetition, it's just really great for this team when you have that ability of you've been here before, as far as being able and the confidence level and the ability to do it again. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to have our goalie segment. We are going to talk about more than just one goalie with the starter and even go down to the farm. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper, and we're almost past the regular season, and regardless of where the Panthers are in the standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. All you had to do is pick whether studs like Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, or if they will record more or less their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Cats fans. You win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Back on this Monday, April 8th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. Here with David Dwork of the Hockey News and the Hockey Show of the Lebatard and Friends Network. And David, I want to go more into the goalies because we do have a goalie on this show today. And you know, it's not really about who's starting, who's not in the postseason. We know what that answer is as far as the Panthers, but just basically as we get closer, as far as the conversation about the Panthers, there's like always so hit and miss about opinions on them. It's about whether it's about the goaltending is like, sometimes we hear, when Sergei Bobrovsky turns into a pumpkin, yada, yada, yada. But sometimes just watching the style of play for Bob, how he reads on the breakaways and staying in front of his crease to take away the angle, how he shifts, how he uses his lateral movement to take away some cross ice feeds and stop some one-timers. It's funny because when it comes to the Panthers and Bobrovsky, I feel like he is the least of the Panthers' worries when it comes to just going into the postseason. And yeah, I know the Panthers, as far as their own zone, haven't played the best in front of them. Sometimes even Maurice has said the team has stayed a little still, but still we've seen plenty of of Bobrovsky bailing out some of his teammates here over the last few weeks. What's your opinion on just the goaltending department as a whole?
I think, as you said, it's probably the most confident that we've been with Sergei Bobrovsky in his 5 seasons with the Panthers, and I think that's kind of a byproduct of the way the last pretty much 2 years now have gone for Bob, starting with maybe late in the season 2 seasons ago when they won the President's Trophy, and they went into that play. Bob got really hot towards late. He was really good in that Washington series. He was excellent in the Tampa series, even though the Panthers kind of got run out of the building in each or in that series at the 4-game sweep, I believe it was, against Tampa. But Bob's been really solid since then. Last year, regular season, obviously last year during the playoffs. And it's just not really a matter of, you mentioned the phrase waiting for Bob to turn into a pumpkin. I hadn't thought about that in a while when you said it. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of indicative of where we're at with Bob right now. He's incredibly consistent. And there's a lot about his game that I think is kind of, I don't want to say evolved because of he's been around for so long, but it's just, he's kind of brought it back to a point where he's operating really well, whether it's the way he's challenging shooters. He's always been an explosive side-to-side movement goaltender. I feel like I always harp on the rebound control. It's always going to be, it is what it is. So we don't have to stick too long around that. I think the way the team defends in front of him right now has really been able to help mitigate that as an issue because they're so good at cleaning up the loose trash in front of the net, whether it's with Bob or with Stolarz. But the Florida Panthers right now are as set as I would say any team as they're heading into the playoffs in terms of their goaltending.
Yeah, in definitely great hands, and what a luxury it is also to have a backup in Anthony Stolarz, where you're paying very little money for him, and then using his big frame, and really, it's funny because a lot of noise has just been around lately as far as Russian goaltenders. It has been around the latest signing that the Flyers have had, and just the fact that they played in bigger rinks, and the fact that you have to use more of your peripherals through that, I think it's truly really helped a lot of goaltenders come over here. I mean, we see some of the best in the league, like the Vasilevskys, Sorokins, Igor Shesterkins of the world, and it's crazy to see what that transition from that rink to North America has really done for a lot of goaltenders. And Bobrovsky, obviously, the two Vezina trophies, he's likely going to finish second this year, but still. He has come a long way since signing that big ticket deal for with the Panthers too, and the downs, but it has certainly been a great up for him just in that.
Yeah, I think overall, when you look at whether it's the Russian goaltenders, you can talk about it's just international, whether it's the Finnish guys like Jussi Saros, Ville Husso, Antti Raanta, the Korpisalo, UPL in Buffalo. You can kind of go on with all these international goaltenders that have just come in here and really kind of blown the lights out, and the next rank of goalies that are coming in as well. So it's fun to watch for me personally because I love goaltending. I love watching the way that it's evolving and coming along. And I mean, maybe I hesitate saying that because the way goaltending has evolved has moved away from guys like me having any kind of chance at all, just because I'm a short guy. And the days of the Mike Vernons and the John Van Beesbrooks and of the world and the Glenn Healy's and those guys, making it to the NHL and making a mark, or they're probably long gone. But it's still really cool the way that it's kind of happening before our eyes, and I'm just kind of excited to see where it goes from here.
No doubt. And I want to touch on the farm. Spencer Knight today in Charlotte, 25 of 26, and the Charlotte Checkers have swept the Hartford Wolfpack this weekend. Magnus Hellberg also got a shutout on Saturday, and there's a thing about the Charlotte Checkers playing the Hartford Wolfpack this season, as two Connecticut boys love playing their home state, the team from their home state. Mackie Semaskevich is a 20-goal scorer this season too. But it also goes, but just the evolution of Spencer Knight is just, number one, it's incredible after everything he's been through. But number two, it's also really about the emphasis that Bill Zito even said going back to media day, really about putting more emphasis on the farm. And by the way, even before the Checkers played a game on Saturday, they clinched their spot in the Calder Cup playoffs too. So just gotta also be very impressed, regardless of the decision that the Panthers make this coming offseason, whether it comes to Bob's no move clause becoming no trade, or what you do with Spencer. You gotta love what you see, regardless of the good problems to have.
Yeah, they've done a great job. I mean, look, they've kind of talked about it from the onset. Bill Zito was hired in September of 2020. Within the next year, they brought in, they created the goaltending excellence department, which is led by Roberto Luongo, his brother Leo, who's doing an amazing job in Charlotte. Francois Allaire, who's like one of the goaltending czars that even I looked up to when I was, I knew who he was as a kid in the 90s growing up in South Florida. So obviously he's huge everywhere else. And then Robbie Tallis, who's maybe, one of the longest standing members of the Panthers franchise. He's been around forever, it seems like. And they've done such a good job that Charlotte has been on one hell of a heater over the last, 6 weeks since late February. And they've gotten great goaltending kind of from the onset, whether you mentioned Spencer Knight, Magnus Hellberg had a shutout recently. They got Matt Gudsta earlier in the season, was playing very well. Evan Cormier came up from the ECHL, and he gave them some good starts as well. And I think it all kind of ties into they know how to recognize talent. and then they know how to nurture it once they have it under their umbrella. And again, I've mentioned it before, but the job that Leo Luongo has done there in Charlotte to help these young goaltenders not just play well, but to grow as young professional goaltenders. It's really been cool to see, and just the way the season's progressed, it kind of makes you wonder what's the future going to hold in store for the Panthers and Spencer Knight.
Yeah, definitely a lot of questions to ask when the Panthers do get there. But hey, every year we've seen a cap clearing trade of some kind. So it's not necessarily a specific player that I want to point to, but it's just to expect somewhere. But to put that possibility that it could be, but nothing set in stone. Obviously, we got to wait until that part of the season is over. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss more about a Panther being nominated for a certain trophy and a conversation that happened on sports radio last week about what is the biggest rivalry in the NHL, and one of them could include the Panthers. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available to U.S. customers. Segment number 3 here on this Monday, April 8th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Here with David Dwork of the Hockey News and of the Hockey Show, part of the Lebatard and Friends Network. And by the way, David, I didn't ask you this in the first segment, but what did you think of a fired up Alexander Barkov when he was wrestled down with a Waterspoon of the Boston Bruins back on Saturday? What did you think of that moment for the captain?
I always enjoy seeing when Barkov, a little bit more of emotion comes out from Barkey, because it's coming from a genuine place. Like, he doesn't show a lot of emotion because it's just who he is, but he's so passionate about hockey. So when you see that little extra come out of him, whether it's, with a smirk after a goal, or usually it comes out more, not so much in the celebratory moments, but in those moments where he's fired up, either, defending a teammate or something that goes wrong physically. So, I thought that was pretty cool. I'm glad you brought that up. I like that, to see that from Barkey.
Yeah, and just when you're just wrestled down and it's like, hey, enough is enough. Get off me. So it's also just the fight there of what the Panthers are, and knowing what was on the line, even though the Panthers did lose in overtime against the Boston Bruins, and the division is likely chances are likely over for the Panthers as far as that overtime loss against the Bees. But when it comes to the news around the Panthers, the Professional Hockey Writers Association, you along with Alex, Kobe, Jordan, and company voted for Oliver Ekman-Larsson as the recipient, as the Panthers representative, for the Bill Masterton Trophy, as a player who has gone through through a bit of perseverance, and it's like a comeback player of the year type of award. And we spoke about OEL and the broken leg, the fractured leg that he experienced in the World Championship, having 7 goals in the last 2 seasons combined, and then the role that he had to play in the first 16 games, and now the role that he has to resume with Ekblad gone, and just as far as under the radar players in the National Hockey League, as far as who he was before to what the role he has now, it's a pretty good story as far as Oliver Ekman-Larsson, what he's done with the Panthers.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that there's probably a lot of people who would have given up on OEL's career after the way that it went with the trade to Vancouver, and all the big, flashy move, one of the top end defensemen in the league, and the 2 foot injuries that he suffered in the 2 off seasons, the way that everything went there. Then he gets bought out. So yeah, he showed up here in Florida at the beginning of the year. He was as crucial as anybody in that roster because he was playing top pairing defensive minutes with Gus Forsling for the first 16 games. He was on that top power play, which did actually quite well when he was quarterbacking it. And throughout the year, he's been in the lineup every game. He hasn't said boo about wherever they've asked him to play, whoever they've asked him to play with. He's done it with the same level of professionalism at the same high level that you would have come to expect of him before the injury-plagued seasons in Vancouver. So he just seemed like a perfect candidate for us to nominate for the award this year. And it's been a pleasure, really, to see how everything's gone for OEL. And good for him because he's a great guy. He's a very nice person and deserving, I think, to have this kind of a bounce back here because, it's never easy for a professional athlete. You're constantly in the spotlight. And when you go through things like that, it's going to suck. So for him to have a little bit of a bounce back, it's all the more better for him.
And then sometimes the noise that could come with not playing well, but then you're not revealing any type of injury that you might be going through. And obviously with hockey, that is not as disclosed, as undisclosed, as the other sports too. So also the mental side of when you get off the ice, when you go home, when you go to bed at night too, and just just the mental grind of it, that has to have been really hard on someone like OEL too. When it comes to that, so big congratulations to him, and and hopefully we will see him as the actual winner. Also, Alex Lyon was the Red Wings representative for them, so big congratulations.
Claude Giroux was another former Panther among the nominees. There might be, I think Noah Juleson was another one that was in there. So a few former Panthers got Masterson nominees, so it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah, really, really cool for sure. But as far as something also that I want to talk about, as far as sports talk radio that happened the other day, just listening to the Jeff Merrick show, and he tweeted something talking about what is the NHL's biggest rivalry going on right now, and one of the responses was the Florida Panthers versus anyone they play. And I got kind of a laugh out of that because it's funny. The conversation even last year was Vegas Golden Knights and whoever they play because they muck it up, they get in your faces. People, it's a team that everyone gets up for to play, and maybe that's part of a reason why the 2-7-1 stretches, because even the non-playoff teams are getting up for the Panthers too. So I think really when it comes to the Panthers and what they've proven, making it all the way to the final, and now everyone wanting a piece of them. I mean, you have your rats like Nick Cousins, Matthew Tkachuk, people who could beat you up physically in Sam Bennett, to ask Hampus Lindholm from a few weeks ago. I mean, when it comes to it, and it comes also to like, it's also a byproduct of their identity of team never backing down. And it also relates to something we talked about even in the first segment of, the penalties aren't going to stop because of their style of play, that it's really hard to play against. And even Marchand spoke about the Panthers are the toughest team to play in the East.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing where if you're the Panthers, this is exactly what you asked for. You wanted to be the team that pounded the crap out of people, that teams did not want to play against, that played the physical playoff style of hockey 24/7, and that's what they've become. And, you reap what you sow, and you're going to get other teams' best every night. And really, if you're the Panthers, that's exactly what you want. You want to face your best challenge every single night because you want to be at your best for when the playoffs come. That's what they're built for. And it's really, Armando, I think if you're a Panthers fan, you have to really just bask in this because for so long, you were that team that not even wanted to be in this situation, but we were happy to be in the playoff chase mix. Where I was just thinking the other day, or maybe earlier today, I think I'm looking at kind of the playoff race, the way it's shaken out in the East, and you mentioned it before. It's coming down, whether it's the Capitals, the Islanders, the Penguins. There's just so many teams in it, and so much to keep track of. But here we are as a Panthers base, and it's you don't have to worry about anything when it comes to the standings. Like, okay, check in the playoffs, check divisional contenders. Like, there's nothing to worry about. And it's almost spoiled because for so long, just getting into the playoff mix was like the key point of the season. So I don't think I'm answering your question properly, but I was just kind of thinking about how far this fan base has come. And it's just, I'm still enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way related to the question that I asked because I mean, obviously you have a target on your back when you go so far. And when you think if let's say Brad Marchand scores on that breakaway in Game 5, probably none of this conversation is happening. Too when it comes to that, the obviously the fan base noise around Paul Maurice would have been even louder going into this year. Now that has crazy how much of a 180 that's turned into after that run too for the Cats. But also it's and even pure example, the next four teams that the Panthers are going to face all have had some type of issues with them. Ottawa, a team that have been back and forth with the whole everyone on the ice gets a penalty. I know the last two matchups haven't really been like that, but even one last season too. Columbus, the whole Erica Branson, Nick Cousins incident that happened way back in December. It's been a long time. That's how long it's been since their last matchup. Buffalo, the very final minutes, the power play 3, as Lomberg liked to say at the time, scored in a garbage time, and then his celly across the bench, and then getting so upset, and then Toronto, the first round series matchup from last year, and also for the Panthers being at home and all. Great opportunity for them too, but also when you think about their identity, the teams coming in, regardless of whether they're postseason or not, you are going to continue getting those great games because the Panthers, they still have something to play for because you do want a higher seed, even though they say it doesn't really matter, but still you have that, you still have games to look forward to, and other teams have games to look forward to when it comes to who's on the other side and what's their resume.
Yeah, I think these last 4 games, all on home ice, as you said, you get a chance to sleep in your own bed, you get a chance to practice, you get a chance to really work on fine-tune the things that they've been trying to sharpen up over the last couple of weeks that we've seen, that it's starting to come together over the last couple of games between Ottawa and Boston. So I think for the Panthers, it's more just getting to feel comfortable and getting to feel good about your game as you go through those final 4 home games. And that's really all it's about for them. Obviously you want to get 2 points every time you go out there, but, similar to like what we saw in Boston, or as you mentioned before, there's other games where they haven't maybe won a game where Paul Maurice has been fine with how they've played. So I think as long as you come out of these last 4 games feeling good about where your game is at, which you have not been able to say much over the last few weeks, save for the past 2 games, I think as long as you can get through that 4-game quadrant, feeling good about your game, no injuries, that's the number one priority right now for the Panthers as they head toward the postseason.
Yeah, and along with that, you have like you said, those other teams fighting for positioning. It's just the South Florida is very lucky that they are in, and really there's not really out of town scoreboard watching because and honestly, if you do want if you're just a fan of hockey, Tuesday night especially is going to be a fun one outside of the Florida Panthers because Detroit and Washington go head to head against each other for positioning, and only game to watch on the night will be as far as hockey will be Toronto versus Pittsburgh. So that one is going to be very juicy, along with a pretty good night as far as the men's national championship. Also, great women's national championship too, between Iowa and South Carolina. So just big sports week too. Also, the Masters is this Sunday, so I know I'm looking forward to it. That's for sure. So, oh man, David, are you excited?
I am excited. I might not be showing it because it's the end of a long weekend, but I am. I'm very pumped, and just as kind of you were going through all that, I was just thinking, this is the hockey playoffs. We talk about them as the best playoffs in sports, and so now we're getting into the lead up to the best playoffs in sports, which is almost just as much fun. Just to hear you kind of prefacing some of the games that are coming up this week. So I am extremely excited. And then when you sprinkle on that the Masters are coming up, let's roll. Let's go, baby.
It's like you're getting on the rock and roller coaster and just ready to like zoom out.
3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Wanted to make a little Disney reference since I know that you're a fan. But David, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, getting a little check-in with you and just getting your overall feelings on everything in relation to the Panthers. So once again, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on here. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work online, my friend.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. You can read all my work on thehockeynews.com/Florida. Also, my podcast, as you mentioned, with Roy Bellamy, the hockey show every Friday on the Lebatard Network, on the DraftKings Network. You can find it there. And, appreciate Armando for having me on and giving me the opportunity to tell you about it and to talk a little bit about what we both love, and that's hockey.
Absolutely, my friend. I thank you so much once again. See you soon, and also talk to you soon, even though a lot of it is off the record. But thank you so much, David, as always.
The group chat doesn't stop.
Yeah, no doubt. See you in a bit. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with David Dwork, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.